Lord, may the words of my mouth and meditation of each and every one of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. For you are our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. The healing of the woman's daughter in the first part of the gospel passage is one of those passages that shows up in those books. It says difficult gospel passages. Because Jesus is there in Tyre, and this woman comes to him and says, my daughter has a demon, can you heal her? Other translations put it, it's not right to throw children's food to the dogs. That comes across as being really, really harsh. And it sounds like Jesus is calling this woman a dog. I picture this when she says, yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's or the children's table. I picture a light bulb going off in Jesus' head, realizing that his mission is much, much broader than just to the Jews. Because he was sent to the Jews. Remember, throughout the Old Testament and all of the stories of Judaism, God is creating this people that are different than anything else. That's the reason for the kosher laws and all these other kind of things. Because it's obvious these folks are different. You know, if you don't think that these folks are different, go up to the Palisades Center Mall on a Sunday. There are ultra-Orthodox communities right in that area. And if you go to the Palisades Mall, you will see families of Orthodox Jews walking around. How will I know they're families of Orthodox Jews? You'll know. They dress differently. They act a little bit differently because they are following the law rigidly. And so all throughout the Old Testament, this new people were created. And as God told Abraham, through this people, the entire world would be blessed. And as Christians, we look on that blessing as being the coming of Jesus. But Jesus was sent first to the Jew, and then to the Gentile. First to the Jew. So the whole idea behind his mission was that Judaism was supposed to morph into this new way of understanding relationship to God that we call Christianity. Why didn't that happen? Because the Jewish leaders had their own political ambitions and all these kind of things and tried to work against what was called at the time the way, or during Acts anyway. So you had the people who became Jesus followers ended up forming a separate religion. But that's not what the original plan was. And so Jesus came to the Jews. And this is an example, I think, this is how I've always interpreted this passage, of Jesus doing his message to the Jews, and here's a non-Jew coming to him and saying, I need you to do something for me. You're not Jewish, I'm not supposed to do it for you. She says something and he goes, wait a minute. I think that's what we see happening here. You know, and it's interesting too that in the letter of James, in this passage, he's talking about how people, Christians in particular, relate to the poor. The poor are the outcast. Now, in Jewish society, anybody who is not Jewish would be an outcast as well. Not ceremonially clean, all those kind of things that we read different stories about. And here's this woman who is unclean, not Jewish, doesn't obey the law. And Jesus ends up helping her. Because he realizes that he's got this responsibility to those who are outside the mainstream. There was a story of a pastor comes into a church, brand new church. For him, it was a new church. Church had been there a number of years. And as people are coming into the church, they see this guy in torn, ratty clothes that smell, sitting on the front steps of the church, and he's kind of huddled up and sleeping there. People walking into the church, looking like this at him, kind of walking around as far as they can to stay away from him to get into the church. And the church fills up and it becomes time for the worship service to start. All of a sudden, that dirty, smelly guy outside stood up and came into the church and walked down the center aisle right up to the front People are like, what's he doing? How can he be going up there? And he takes off the dirty clothes, and it's the pastor. And the sermon that day was about how do we, as Christians, live out our faith with those who we look on as being less than us. It's exactly what James is talking about. If someone with great clothes comes in, dressed up really nice, comes in the church, oh, morning, sir, welcome, we're so glad you're here. Why don't you sit right up front up here? And a dirty homeless guy comes in and sit in the back corner so nobody sees you, away from people so they often smell you. James is saying if you do that, aren't you showing favoritism? And how deserving are we of God's grace? You've received God's grace and God's forgiveness, even though you didn't deserve it, yet you're discriminating against other people. I remember when I was a member of a church before I became a pastor, we had a baptism on Sunday. And a lot of times when you have baptism, you get a whole bunch of people coming in that are not normally there. And that was the case with this particular one. And there was one family, and the dad came in and he was wearing just a white t-shirt and jeans. They weren't ripped or torn or dirty, but it was just a t-shirt and jeans. It was an older woman, probably late 70s, early 80s. Oh, I was friends with her, we were talking. And she said, did you see that guy wearing the jeans and the t-shirt? Why would somebody dressed like that come into church? And I said to her, well, I would rather have him here in jeans and a t-shirt than not have him here in a suit. I said, I think that's what matters to God, too. She goes, I guess I can see that, but you have to understand something. As I was growing up, I was taught you showed respect for the place you were by how you dressed. Those attitudes hang on a lot. I mean, we got the phrase, you're Sunday best, right? I am very gratified that in these churches, people feel comfortable enough to come to church in jeans and a t-shirt. I think it's very, very cool. I think it makes other folks who come in, visitors, feel comfortable too, because you don't have to like. I've actually had people that I've talked to, and they talk about, oh, it's a church I'd like to come. How do I have to dress? I said, I tend to dress up, but everybody else, I mean, 3/4 are in jeans and t-shirts, sometimes shorts, sandals. Doesn't matter, whatever you're comfortable in. We've gotten, as a society, we've gotten away from those roles so much. I was watching something a while back, and it was the early 1900s. A man never went out of his house without wearing a suit and tie. And they all wore hats. In a former life, I sold office furniture. I was a manufacturer's rep, and one of the companies we represented was Vogel Peterson. There is a Vogel Peterson coat rack in this church down there and in Herdtown, right when you come in. That's Vogel Peterson. You can tell how old it is, because the old ones have 3 hat racks. The new ones only have 1. People don't wear hats anymore. All that formality has kind of gone away. So the idea of someone dressing up in a fine suit to come into your meeting, James says, and he's talking about worship, and somebody else coming in not as nice clothes, is kind of gone away at this point. And we still do differentiate between people based on a whole host of different things. Sometimes it's by how they look. Sometimes it's by the accent they speak with. Sometimes it's by the color of their skin. Sometimes it's by the food they eat. What kind of car they drive. So even though that clothing distinction thing has gone away, we have not ceased to differentiate between people and to pick out ways where, well, at least I'm better than Justin. And that's exactly what James is talking about here, and I think it's what happened to Jesus in this thing. He understood that he was actually discriminating against this woman and corrected himself. You see him in other instances, like the woman at the well. She's not Jewish. She's a Samaritan. And he talks to her. Good Jews wouldn't do that. He came to understand that his mission was to everybody. Now that mission has been passed on to us. He said right before he ascended, go out and teach people everything that I have taught you. So he learned that if anybody has favor in the kingdom, it's the poor and the lowly, not the wealthy. Remember the rich young man? Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? You know the commandments, and he mentioned several of them. Keep them. And the young man says, I have kept all of these from birth. Followed the letter of the law, really, really careful, just like the Pharisees. And Jesus looked at him and loved him, it says, and told him, you lack one thing. He says, go and sell everything you have and give the money to the poor. And then come and follow me, and you will have riches in heaven. And it says the young man went away very sad because he was very, very rich. Jesus says it's so hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to go into the kingdom of heaven. And the rich were looked on as being blessed by God in that society. So his disciples very understandably said to him, well then, who can be saved? And Jesus said, with man it's impossible, but with God all things are possible. Now our society looks down on the poor. They're lazy. They don't want to work. They just want to leech off of others. All these things that you've heard said. Maybe you've said one or two of them yourself at some point. But the Bible talks about God has this special concern for the poor. And if we are God's people, then that means we have to have a special sense for the poor. And we have announcements in a little while. Ginny's going to talk about the bridge run, which is exactly that, having concern for the poor, things that we can do. Because I didn't print out your email. I did, but I didn't bring it. Oops. But I did forward it to everybody. So. It's easy to get sucked into these things. You know, I'll bring up something about this election today. We've got this election that's beginning at this point, the campaign. You've got Donald Trump leading all the polls among the GOP candidates. I saw something on CNN about his escalator. The escalator in Trump Tower that he rode down with somebody, and people are going there and riding the escalator because it's the one that he rode and they saw on TV and all this kind of nonsense. He's being admired because he flies in his own helicopter, and he flies in his own plane. And he has all this wealth and power. But an awful lot of what you hear him saying doesn't seem like it's coming out of love. It's coming out of frustration and anger that people have. But it's not coming out of love. Is someone like Donald Trump, and I use his name only because he's in the news, is someone like a Donald Trump living the kind of life that God would have us to live? And W.R. Grace was the chairperson, or was the chairperson of W.R. Grace Incorporated, was a very dedicated Christian. And he used his wealth for the betterment of other people. And he lived his faith out. I remember seeing him on the Crystal Cathedral with Robert Schuller years ago. And he really made a concerted effort to use what he was given to bless others, because he believed that to whom much is given, much is required. We have been given a lot. And that's not to say that some of us aren't struggling financially, because I know I have my times, everybody else has their times too. But we all have food to eat, we all have friends, we have our church, we have all those kinds of things. God has blessed us with it. And God does expect us to follow his commands. So take a lesson from James. Be conscious of the ways that you might be discriminating against somebody. Because we all do it. A lot of it's subconscious. But Christ calls us to be better. As he said, in God all things are possible. So that hidden, subconscious discrimination that we have, we can work past that with God's help. So rely on God so that you might be more of what God wants you to be. Let's pray. Lord God, we give you thanks and praise for all that you've done in our lives, for the blessings you've given us, for the opportunities to be in service.